talk about it, and it's so interesting, and that makes it much more valuable when I'm showing it to classes. But
Yeah.
then, once I retire,
All that knowledge is
it's
lost.
gone. Yeah.
Yeah. That
So,
was part of the pride of craft, right? As a librarian or a curator or is knowing people and knowing their stories. And some people got down to writing those things out, and some people it was just a matter of personal pride and their respect, but respected for your knowledge. Now all the knowledge is so readily available that I think it's a different, totally different context for that kind of information.
mm,
I was struggling with having my glasses reflect the screen.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, I got to write to Emily about how do I make this not happen and stuff. And then I thought, Emily is just going to go online. She's just going to go on Google and she's going to say glasses reflecting in screen on Zoom. So I go online and I type in glasses reflecting on screen in Zoom. And soon, of course, I got the solution, which I don't, you guys probably know it, but I didn't.
Well, my glasses are pretty reflective. So what's the
apparently,
secret?
you haven't done the Googling.
Yeah.
I'm now the person who has this information. The solution is you tip your glasses down, right? Lift the ears, lift the ears
Okay.
up, okay, or the arms or whatever, lift them up. So how do you lift them up? Are your glasses tight to your head and you can just go chink and they stay? Or what? So one of the very important, very respected gals takes a twist of her hair and puts a bobby pin and sticks the glasses through that. But I don't have enough hair to do that. So I had to really innovate. And, and in fact, my glasses are held up. See how high up they are? Held up by Q-tips taped, 4 Q-tips to each one. My glasses at the right angle, so I'm not like this. I'm like this. So that's the and I would show you no, I can't change my coif or anything to show you, but yeah, Q-tips. That's a trick.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
And of course, my husband helped me because I was going, do you have some cotton? Could I? How am I going to do this? And we sort of figured it out in 4 Q-tips taped together. A line.
That is our free tip for the audience for the evening. I see nearly 40 people have joined us, and we're a couple of minutes after 6. I think we can go ahead and get started. I'm just going to give a very brief opening remarks and then hand it over to Jane. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kevin Schlottman, the Interim Director of Columbia University's Rare Book and Manuscript Library. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's talk by Felicia Rice, which is RBML's contribution to this 2021 virtual edition of Bibliography Week. First, even though we are meeting virtually, I would like to acknowledge the Native people on whose land Columbia University is built. We recognize Manhattan as part of the ancestral and traditional homeland of the Lenni Lenape and Wappinger peoples. By acknowledging the legacies of displacement, migration, and settlement that have enabled us to gather, we are taking a small first step toward the long and overdue process of healing and repair. The book arts have been a collecting focus of RBML since its inception in 1930. Our collections contain both books about books, that is, books about paper and other substrates, ink, illustration, typography, type founding, printing, binding, and collecting, as well as examples of fine printing and book illustration. As RBML has been collecting specimens of fine bookmaking for so long, we have a robust collection of high points in the history of printing, specimens from historic presses, fine press books, livres d'artiste, and since 1991, artist books. We also have a long history of engaging the creators, scholars, and aficionados of the book arts community, and it is in this tradition that tonight's talk falls. I will now hand the floor off to Jane Siegal, the RBML's librarian for rare books, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. So welcome to all our friends, old friends, new friends. First, just to make clear what you probably have noticed, that this is a Zoom webinar. So you are all invisible to us and muted. But please, if you have any questions, type them into the Q&A at any time. And at the end, I'll ask Felicia as many of the questions as we can manage. I want to thank my colleagues who have helped make this event happen, Kevin, but especially Emily Sasso, who has been and is dealing with all the technology. You may also want to know that Felicia has another talk on Thursday, a panel discussion out of UC Santa Cruz on the Moving Parts Press and collaboration. It sounds really interesting. There's more information and a link to registration on Felicia's website. I think I worked out it was 8 o'clock here or 8:30, something like that in New York.
8 o'clock.
Columbia has been hosting this book arts lecture during Bibliography Week for 25 years. We've generally tried to tie it to our exhibitions that are on view, but we don't have any exhibitions right now while Butler Library is closed to non-Columbia people. So I suggested Felicia Rice as a speaker for today because she exemplifies so much of what's been happening this past year. The extreme wildfires in California, which destroyed Felicia's home and studio, echoes the invisible virus, which is rampaging through the world. Indeed, Felicia finished her book, The Necropolitics of Extraction, in June 2020. Unsold copies of it burned in August, including the copy which Columbia would have bought once we had come out of our COVID purchasing lockdown. So we will not have that book. So in any case, Felicia's work to amplify the voices of Chicanx and Latinx artists and writers and to advocate social, political, and environmental justice reflects the activism around the racism of this past year, which has, for example, driven us as an institution to question the way we operate. But also, for me, Felicia's updates from her GoFundMe have reflected an optimism moving forward in spite of everything that I have personally found very encouraging in these trying times. Felicia Rice started Moving Parts Press in Santa Cruz in 1977 after studying at UC Santa Cruz and learning and working with printers such as Jack Stoffaker, William Everson, and Sherwood Grover of the Grabhorn Press. She prints really well and makes beautiful books. Over time, the content of her work came to focus on Chicanx, Latinx authors and artists, and her work's format has become freer, merging word and image more and more and bursting out of the codex. She has taught and lectured and exhibited her work widely. Her work is collected by institutions across the United States and in Britain. The Moving Parts Press archives are held at Special Collections UC Santa Barbara Library. And we are glad that Felicia is here to speak to us today. All right.
Okay. I'll get started. With my talk. Okay, am I going forward correctly? Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, then I am
to
start. Okay. In this talk, I will echo some of what Jane just said, so you'll hear some repeats, but I will present my journey of loss and recovery with a brief history of where I've been and something about where I am going. In preparing this, I discovered in a new way just how challenging this journey is on every level. I will read my notes as I do not trust myself to be able to extemporize on this story. In 1977, I founded Moving Parts Press in downtown Santa Cruz, where I entertained clients and authors, artists and students for over a decade before moving the press to the mountains of Santa Cruz. My letterpress shop and my entire archive of artist books was destroyed in the CZU Lightning complex fire in August 2020. I have relocated to Mendocino, and with the help of over 700 supporters thus far, I am reestablishing Moving Parts Press in my childhood home.
Felicia, we're not seeing your screen. We're not seeing your slides.
You're not seeing my slides. Escape. What's going on here? Let's try again. Play. How's that? Do you see them now?
Well, we don't see your screen.
Don't see.
We're just still seeing you.
You're seeing me. So I'm going back to Zoom, making sure that I'm sharing my screen. Am I sharing my screen? Here's my keynote. Is it? Share. How's that?
Oh, much better.
Okay, so now I want to play it. Well, you know, this isn't it either. Well, unless this works, let's try. How's that? Is that working?
That's great.
All right, so
Thank you.
I'll pick up, or I can go back just so you can see my cool image here that you missed. And then moving forward. I think of myself as a printer, an artist, and a publisher. As a printer, my job is to confront complex issues and render my response to them in book form. As an artist, my job is to do so with profound integrity. As a publisher, my job is to make these issues public. As printers have done every decade since Gutenberg, I am here to argue for a more just society. With one foot firmly planted in the 19th century and the other in the 21st, I employ traditional typography and bookmaking methods together with digital technology to bring the flexibility of screen-based design to the texture and history of the letterpress printed page. Before the fire, my letterpress print shop was located on a ridge in the Santa Cruz Mountains above the Pacific Ocean. My studio of 850 square feet was the ground floor of my home and fit me like a glove. Over 45 years, I had built a complete letterpress print shop with a beautiful Victoria platen press and 2 Vandercook proof presses. I had a very fine collection of 200 cases of metal type of the highest quality, irreplaceable, inherited from the fine printer Sherwood Grover. Moving Parts Press was located here at 10699 Empire Grade, Bonnie Doon, California. We rented the house for 25 years. Here is the house at 6 o'clock the evening of August 19, 2020. Here is the site of my home and shop 12 hours later, the morning of August 20th. The view from the driveway after the fire took the entire neighborhood. Our area just below Alba Road and to either side of Empire Grade was devastated. At least 20 homes plus outbuildings were destroyed. I'll just run through a few slides of the site taken in September and November. I have visited 3 times and taken hundreds of photographs. This wasn't an explosion, but a very, very hot and fast house fire. It is possible to see just how the building collapsed in place. Esteemed photographer Shmuel Thaler of the Santa Cruz Sentinel newspaper created a photo essay on my experience for the Thanksgiving issue of the paper. 2 things I can be grateful for: our safety, and the fact that in 2018, the Moving Parts Press archive went to special collections at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So one of each of my print pieces through 2018 are tucked away safely there, where people can visit and see the work. Fortunately, my books are also collected widely. Here's Sherwood's 1948 Victoria platen press. Losing his legacy is disturbing. I was merely the caretaker of these historic pieces for the duration of my lifetime. I feel very unsettled by my inability to do so. The room where my most valuable books were carefully stored, with stacks of books made up of ash. It's amazing how they hold their shape. A galley rack for standing type. All we can see is ash where this type once stood. A metal print rack warped and twisted. On the right, a type cabinet, which should be full of 48 drawers of metal type, but is absolutely empty. The two Vandercook proof presses with a type cabinet toppled over between them. The only evidence of thousands of pieces of metal type is a few rivulets of lead. Lead type melts at just over 600 degrees. With the average temperature of a house fire ranging from 1 to 2,000 degrees, it is likely thousands of beautiful letters vaporized. After the fire, the tree crews moved in, most often without the owner's knowledge, let alone permission, and cleared many of the trees left standing. These logs were stacked alongside the ruins on our property. But we were simply renters. We didn't own the property, so we were able to pull up stakes and move north to my family home in Mendocino. My artist parents purchased the house in 1961. They were founding faculty of the Mendocino Art Center, where they taught every summer until moving to live full-time in Mendocino in 1970. I finished high school here. I think I have time to read this description written by my son of his grandparents. People cannot live without art, nor can they pursue art without life. Without life's muses, an artist becomes a soul lost in a vacuum, aimless, barely moving. To fuse art, love, and life, to give oneself to the infinities of all three, is to begin a new journey, a path nearly unbeaten. To an adventurous pair, no journey could be more exciting. A photo of my father, painter-filmmaker Ray Rice, taken in the early 60s when he was part of the art and architecture movement in the San Francisco Bay Area. His archives, including some 40 experimental animated films, are in special collections at the UCSC University Library. My mother, Miriam C. Rice, unlocked the full spectrum of color from mushrooms, and her work is known throughout the world wherever natural dyeing and fiber arts are pursued. Her interest in the pigments was from an artist's perspective. Her book, Mushrooms for Dyes, Paper, Pigments, and Mycosticks, a form of crayon, is still in print. Our house, the shed where I am working, is in the back. The view of the Pacific Ocean out the front window. The booming of the waves and the foghorn are regular companions. My mom died 10 years ago at 92, and it is as if she is still taking care of us. My artist books are the result of collaborations with artists and writers. At first, my books were text-focused, but over the last 30 years, my books have become more and more visual. Book structures in which word and image meet and merge. I published my first book of poetry in 1980. In the early years, the 1980s to mid-90s, I made letterpress books and laser printed chapbooks with local, regional, and national poets. These were books with a traditional treatment of word and image, with text and image on opposing pages. In the early 90s, the imagery began to be more prominent in my book work. These two books set my Chicanx Latinx series in motion. This series explores works of contemporary Chicanx Latinx artists and writers and is issued in both limited and trade editions. In the first book in the series, De Amor Oscuro, of Dark Love, I was fortunate to collaborate with my father, Ray Rice, and poet Francisco X. Alarcón. The book is made up of 16 homoerotic love sonnets in Spanish and English. The drawings run underneath the poems as a frieze. The next book was with Elba Rosario Sanchez. Francisco and Elba taught at UC Santa Cruz, where I taught book arts 1 quarter a year for 14 years between 1984 and 98. The class was held in my studio and was project-based, students printing and publishing faculty writing and imagery under the Moving Parts Press imprint. Tallos de Luna, Moonshoots, was a class project published in 1992 with poems by Elba Sanchez and drawings by Robert Quirito. Among the crowning achievements of the 20th century book are the French Livre d'Artiste, limited editions integrating visual and poetic texts. I dreamed of publishing a series of books modeled on the career of the early 20th century publisher Ambroise Vollard, publishing the finest artists and writers of our time in book form. Elizabeth R. Jackson and I did 2 books together in a short series titled the Livre d'Artiste series. Liz translated this book, Made aux Sems, with poems and prints by Henri Michaud from the French, the first English translation. The new edition replicated the original 1948 French Livre d'Artiste. The text appears side by side with full-page lithographs. Poet Nate Mackey and sculptor Doyle Foreman taught at UCSC when the next book was produced by students under my direction. Song of the Andumbulu, 18 through 20, features poems by Nathaniel Mackey with a rubbing from a bas-relief bronze sculpture by Doyle Foreman on the title page. The long, narrow poems define the dimensions of the book and dominate the page. The artist's book, Codex Espangliensis, was the result of a 5-year collaboration from 1993 to 98 with Guillermo Gomez Pena and Enrique Chagoya. The 3rd book in the Chicanx Latinx series, Codex Espangliensis, From Columbus to the Border Patrol, was made up of performance texts by Guillermo Gomez Pena, which I integrated into collage imagery by Enrique Chagoya. In this project, I began to move type into the sphere of the image. A trade edition of Codex Espangliensis was co-published with City Lights Books in San Francisco in 2000. It remains in print 20 years later, and the issues called out, the fantasies of nationalism, ethnocentrism, and historical amnesia, are pressing to this day. A trade edition interprets the original book in a form intended for general sale and available at an affordable price. If the book is so important that much time and effort has been lavished on the limited edition's production, it must be seen and read by a wider audience. In this spread, Chagoya's collage imagery draws on prints by Posada, the 19th century Mexican printmaker, Theodore de Brie, the 15th century Belgian engraver and publisher, and Chagoya himself, based on Disney's Mickey Mouse, in addition to early Mexican advertising and much, much more. Este diálogo no lo entendemos. We don't understand this dialogue. West of what? North of what? Yves Perret, contemporary French poet, here with one of my dad, Ray Rice's painted wooden strips that inspired their collaboration. The 2 never met, but they just missed one another in Mendocino, and it was the poet who suggested my father create the imagery for their book, Cosmogony Intime, an intimate cosmogony. My father died in 2001 as a result of a stroke that took place right here in our shed, with a paintbrush in his hand, 6 months after finishing Cosmogony Intime. Cosmogony Intime, an intimate cosmogony, is the 2nd book in the Livre d'Artiste series, with poems by Yves Perret, translation by Elizabeth R. Jackson, and drawings by Ray Rice. To date, there have been no further books in that series, but I leave the door open. 5 poems in French and English, flank drawings in the gutter of the folded sheets that are hinged together to form an accordion fold book. Again, the text and image hold their own. They share the page, but do not mix. Monica Brown, the Peruvian-American children's book author, wrote the alphabet book, Alfabeto Animado, the lively alphabet. This is the 4th book in the Chicanx Latinx series. El Alfabeto Animado, the lively alphabet, with text in Spanish and English by Monica Brown, translated into Quechua by Jenny Huarfa, and my drawings. The book is populated with hand-knit finger puppets set in scenes printed on a rainbow of cloth from Cusco. Driven by active verbs in Spanish, the alphabet progresses 2 letters at a time through a series of scenes. M, manejar, to drive, the monkey's driving the truck. N, nadar, to swim, the alligator and the bird are swimming in the stream. In 2007, I was approached by Guillermo Gomez Pena and Gustavo Vazquez about making a new book, a response to their video project, Documentado Undocumented. It had been 9 years since my earlier collaboration with Guillermo. 2 others, Jennifer Gonzalez and Zachary Watkins, were invited into the collaboration, and the 5 of us met over a 7-year period to produce the performative artist's book, Doc and Doc, Documentado Undocumented, Ars Shamanica Performatica. Doc on Doc addresses the political, geographic, social, and psychological boundaries between the United States and Mexico. It is a mixed media production housed in a high-tech aluminum case, which contains my print book with performance text by Gomez Pena and critical commentary by art historian Jennifer Gonzalez, as well as sound art by Zachary Watkins and the videos that triggered the project by Gustavo Vazquez. Doc on Doc is a traveling case for apprentice shamans, a reliquary for imaginary saints, a toolbox for self-transformation, a quiet call to heal yourself with fetishes and antidotes, a border kit to face the uncertainty of future crossings. There were 65 books printed, of which 15 were housed in the electronic case. There were 15 spreads in this accordion fold book, which extends to over 31 feet. The aim is for the book to perform the text, actual scripts for stage performance in the absence of the performance artist. Here, type is integrated into the image, subsumed by the image. In addition, an excerpt from the script is printed below the image. Here's the excerpt from Free Falling Toward a Borderless Future by Guillermo Gomez Pena. Standing on the map of my political desires, I toast to a borderless future. With our Alaskan hair, our Canadian head, our US torso, our Mexican genitalia, our Central American cojones, our Caribbean vulva, our South American legs, our Patagonian feet, our Antarctic nails, jumping borders with ease, jumping borders with pleasure. Amen. Hey, man. Excerpt from Explaining to a Nurse What I Do. I am an artist who sells ideas, not objects, not images, not skills. A performance artist, which means I write letters with my own blood. I wrestle with historical ghosts and post-colonial demons. I research the possibilities of silence and darkness. An excerpt from Border Interrogation. Aquí Gomez Pena again with another Mexican Brechtian moment. Dear foreign audience, before we continue, I'd like to ask you some basic questions which are at the core of American identity. I've been asked myself each of these questions at least 100 times. No big deal. May I? How many of you consider yourselves pure-blooded whites? What about people of color? And the rest? Any undocumented immigrants in the audience? People who were once illegal, perhaps, besides me? In 2017, City Lights Books and Moving Parts Press co-published a trade edition of Doc on Doc. It presents the entire project and includes reproductions of the 15 prints, the original performance scripts, and a USB drive with the video and sound art. So far, City Lights has co-published the trade editions of 2 Moving Parts Press books, Codex Espangliensis and Doc on Doc. I am very grateful for this amazing partnership, which has allowed my books to be experienced around the globe. Juan Felipe Herrera is a poet, performer, writer, cartoonist, teacher, and activist. Between 2015 and 17, Juan Felipe was the 21st US Poet Laureate, the nation's first Chicano Poet Laureate. In 2019, I published Border Bus, a book of Juan Felipe's poem of the same name. the 6th book in the Chicanas X Latinx series. Border Bus is a rendering of one long poem. The poem takes place on a U.S. Department of Homeland Security ICE bus. 2 women have been detained while trying to cross the US-Mexico border and are being transported to a detention center. One woman speaks in English. She has been detained before, and the other is new to the experience. She speaks in Spanish. She is angry, frightened, sad, shaken. She tells the traumatic story of her family in Honduras and her journey to the border. ¿A dónde vamos? Where are we going? On a bus to nowhere. We got it? You got it? Those people there, who are they? Thirst and hunger, day after day, hermana. Here you see the source of one of the photo images, a demonstration against an ICE bus. The choice of the photo is the result of extensive web research and was printed in red on a red background from photopolymer plates. My sketches of the women's faces were drawn from 2 films documenting the journey from Central America to the United States. Maria and Tierra del Nadie by Marcela Zamora and De Nadie by Tin Dierdemal. I made 100 drawings and used only a handful of them. In laying out the text and images, I considered which text would appear with which drawings and the treatment of the type. I manipulated the type in Photoshop, a different font for each voice, to express the whispered exchange between the 2 women, which I then printed in silver to convey the quiet, intimate, but urgent conversation between them. A precedent for my type treatment was published in 1967 in the Evergreen Review, a visual typographic interpretation of Edith Piaf's performance of the song Le Fou by Messin, a French graphic designer, art director, and typographer. Messin's design and writings were influential in the US, where they helped trigger the post-functionalist approach to graphic design that led to the eclecticism of the late 1980s and 90s. I just want us to be together. And finally, freedom comes from deep within. The poem closes with, "We are nothing, and we come from nothing, but that nothing is everything if you feed it with love. That is why we will triumph. We are everything, hermana, because we come from everything." In my iterative process, I repeat the same steps over and over to refine the result. I feed the paper into the press 1 sheet at a time and make small changes with each sheet, adding ink, shifting the location of the printing plates, adjusting the position of the sheet in relation to the plates, adjusting the amount of impression. In the end, each printed sheet is unique. Professor T.J. Demos, writer and environmental justice activist, and longtime collaborator and binder, Craig Jensen, worked with me to make the necropolitics of extraction. In this accordion fold book, 1 long print comments on the rapacious aspects of global extraction and resolves in a call to action with T.J. Demos's essay. It is my contribution to the Codex Foundation's current project, Extraction, Art on the Edge of the Abyss. Collaboration can take many forms. This was my first crack at extracting phrases or words from an existing publication by the author, building images with those words, then inviting the author to write an essay in response to my work to be published in the book. Here I'm adding the gaseous orange smog using pressure printing, and then printing the experimental text developed from degraded letraset transfer type from a photopolymer plate. Capitalism's rapacious commodification of anything and everything. Exploitative international trade agreements. Movement building and solidarity with those on the front lines of opposition. Greta Thunberg, Emma Gonzalez, Malala, Robert Bullard, Berta Casares, Tom B.K. Goldsmith, Wangari Maathai. And finally, to make the impossible gradually possible. There is no other choice. I had just finished The Necropolitics of Extraction when the fire took everything. There are 10 copies remaining of an edition of 40. I had planned to hand color 10 copies, only 3 remain. Califas, An Ancestral Journey, El Viaje Ancestral, was co-published with Museo Eduardo Carrillo and is making its debut this month. It is part of Museo's Califas Legacy Project, celebrating Chicanx legacy artists and Latinx art in the Tri-County region ringing the Monterey Bay. The book was produced in a limited edition of one original copy. It has a 3D shadow box cover by Amalia Mesa Baines, followed by paintings by Ralph de Oliveira, Carmen Leon, Guillermo Aranda, and Eduardo Carrillo, executed by Betsy Anderson. A small edition of full-size facsimiles was also created for collaborators, digital facsimiles. Amalia Mesa Baines' shadow box commemorates the role of her ancestors with male and female burial figures from Jalisco, Mexico. Ralph de Oliveira's painting of the Chumash Rainbow Bridge begins this collaborative movable mural. The rainbow ties Ralph and Carmen's panels together. Carmen's panel celebrates the Peruvian and Mexican deities of her ancestors within the landscape of the Central Coast. Guillermo Aranda reflects on his Aztec ancestors in his painting. We all collaborated very closely with Betsy Anderson, Museo Director, on the Califas Book Project. Museo Eduardo Carrillo is a virtual museum only and will be co-hosting an online exhibit of the entire Califas project beginning in March. This will be included in the Google Cultural Institute, a Google nonprofit initiative to make arts and culture accessible worldwide. The Califas Legacy Project includes documentary videos, exhibitions, community programming, and online resources. 9 organizations are participating in a series of events taking place between January and April 2021. This is the exhibit, currently virtual, at the Monterey Museum of Art. Other books and broadsides from the Moving Parts Press Chicanx Latinx series are also showing here until April. I also designed a commercially printed small-scale edition of the book. 750 copies are being given to schools, libraries, museums, and other youth-serving organizations throughout the Central Coast region. This trade edition of the book went into a second printing because 500 of the first 750 copies were destroyed in the August fire. The Santa Cruz City Arts Commission generously supported both printings. In collaboration with the Santa Cruz and Watsonville Public Libraries and in response to the pandemic, displays of the book inside the libraries are augmented by banners facing the world. I have to say this project was incredibly well supported by the community. The Arts Council of Santa Cruz County, the California Arts Council, California Humanities, and the Hit and Run Press all donated to support our projects. Latinx Chicanx Poetics is a series of broadsides by contemporary queer Latinx Chicanx poets and is co-edited with poets Angel Dominguez and Hannah Kazima. When we met 6 years ago as neighbors in Bonnie Doon, it quickly became clear that a cross-pollination would occur. Hope Beyond the Shape of a Century by Angel Dominguez. An excerpt. This country wakes you up with shapes of genocide and war. The country rise, taking selfies against a pile of corpses. Everyone so died soft at funerals. La Independencia de Puerto Rico, Raquel Salas Rivera. Hannah Kazima was working with me in the shop, typesetting, printing, designing, acting as a wonderful soundboard when the pandemic hit a year ago. We stopped working together physically for some months, then had some time in the shop, masked with plenty of ventilation. Then everything came to a screeching halt. First Generation Decolonized Bilinguista by Josiah Luis Alderete, with my drawing from Doc on Doc actually repurposed. Nunca Muero by Tatiana Luboviski Acosta, with one of my drawings again, also from Doc on Doc. Queer Paloma Families, Farid Matuk. I'm continuing this series in Mendocino and will be printing the next broadside in February. I miss having Pena with me. And during the last incredibly challenging year, I began publishing poems and broadsides online on my website on 2 pages, Poems for George Floyd by Bo Beausoleil and A Virus Held Us, Pandemic Poems by Lynn Ellis. This effort is the opposite of creating a limited edition. The point is to get the word out there as fast and as widely as possible. So please visit Moving Parts Press, the website, movingpartspress.com, for more of my projects and publications. The current home of Moving Parts Press is the 9 by 14 foot shed that my father used as his studio for 40 years. In October, a crew of 6 moved a Vandercook proof press out of the calligrapher Judy Dietrich's root cellar just 6 miles to my shed. I was fortunate to find a press locally, and it's a real beauty. The shed has been insulated and so far is pretty snug this winter, though I am here in my kitchen and not in the shed because it's really cold. In November, I printed my first broadsides on the new press. The broadsides are dedicated to recovery from the fires last summer. I selected 3 poems by noted Santa Cruz poets Ellen Bass, Danusha Lamaris, and Gary Young. Each poem addresses issues of loss and recovery in the face of crisis. The images are my drawing of hands, a photo from our burn site by Grace Brieger, and a woodcut by Gary Young. The broadsides are available for sale at Bookshop Santa Cruz. All proceeds from the sale of the broadsides will be donated to aid in the recovery of the community from the devastating wildfires of August 2020. My story of my next book project, working title Justice and Injustices, begins in the Evergreen Cemetery in Mendocino. The text of the book is based on the work of poet Teresa Whitehill. The graves go back to the logging era of the late 1900s. I spent a month visiting every day, making rubbings of the alphabet, A Day, B Day, C Day, and so on. I'm experimenting with creating words from the letter forms and etching relief printing plates using my new laser cutter, an exciting purchase since the fire for this purpose. My drawings of birds figure largely in this book. So far, my favorites are the vultures that populate the skies around me. And I have to say, with this move, I expect there will be changes in the colors that show up in my prints, from the greens, golds, and browns of the forest of Bonnie Doon to those of the Mendocino coast, which is dominated by the blues and grays of the sky and ocean. I wouldn't have thought it possible, but due to the incredible generosity of over 700 people, I've been able to pivot from scrambling for the very survival of the press to a dream of thriving in a new building. Plans for a new studio to replace the existing shed are before the Mendocino Historical Review Board. My dad submitted drawings for this building 40 years ago when he was just about my age, and they were approved but never realized. Rising from the ashes. I feel hopeful about the future of Moving Parts Press. Thanks to my family of collaborators, friends, fellow letterpress fanatics, artists, activists, bookmakers, writers, librarians, book lovers. Did I leave anyone out? Interested parties? To help raise Moving Parts Press from the ashes, please visit this GoFundMe page and donate to the rebuilding of the press in my new home. Thank you. I am honored to have been included in this series and in this year's virtual Bibliography Week in New York. On Thursday, a group of my collaborators will come together for a Zoom panel to celebrate Moving Parts Press. As said before, the event is co-hosted and by the UCSC University Library and the Institute for Arts and Sciences. There will be some overlap with today's talk, but this is an unprecedented opportunity to hear from folks I've worked with on some of the projects you have just seen. Oh dear. Let's see. I'm just looking for stop share, stop video, Where's stop share?
I think you did it.
Did I?
Think so.
We're back?
I don't think I'm seeing your screen.
Good, good. Okay, thank you.
So I want to encourage you all, if you do have any questions, to put them into the Q&A, and I will move them forward. But first, I want to ask Felicia my own question, which is about the about studio time, because I feel like a year ago, studio time was enjoyable and restorative, and I just wonder, you lost that studio, you've got a new one, we're all in this ridiculous isolation, and I wonder if that's changing your relationship with studio work.
Well, as a working artist, although I have held a job most of my working life, my studio time has been really important to me. And it isn't always restorative and regenerative. It tends also to be very hard work. It's a challenge. I think it's a challenge that I've set myself to pursue this work throughout a lifetime as a vocation. And it brings with it all the crap, you know, all the difficulties, all the disappointment, frustration, uncertainty. Sometimes I feel like that's most of what's happening. But particularly when a book is done and actually bound by the incredible Craig Jensen and a polished piece, and I take a step back, maybe even it can take as long as 2 years to go, oh my God, I did that. That's something, you know, I feel good about that. I always feel good about being in the studio, but I don't always feel good when I'm in the studio.
That makes sense. It's funny. I know, because I've been talking to artists and collecting artist books for 20 years or more now. And, at first I had this very, I guess, idealistic view that an artist was in a studio making art, and that was all there was to it. And what I've come to realize is there's so much more that goes on outside the studio. You can't afford to be an artist unless you sell the art, and you're working with all these collaborators. There's so much non-studio part, and it's always, I'm always learning.
Yeah.
What that is like. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I also wonder, because I know that in my own journey as a curator, I was always interested in the content of work, but I've become just more and more interested in work that has sort of politically or socially conscious content. And it feels like you've perhaps been on a similar journey. And I just wonder, for you, how conscious was that? And, or did it start happening and then you were like, oh, this is where I need to focus?
Yeah, well, as a Northern Californian with two lefty artist parents, I was raised in a politically conscious environment. And I started this work with that awareness. And I felt immediately that it was critical to give voice to those whose voice is not always heard, to speak for my own experience as a woman. And so my very first book was by Ellen Bass, For Earthly Survival. And it focused on nuclear holocaust. It was on our minds in the 80s. We were all concerned about it. And so my first book was about poems on that topic. And it's continued. It's just continued. The thing that happened was that in the early 90s, you see that I started to focus on the Chicanx Latinx community, which was a big part of my community there on the Central Coast, is a big part of all our lives now, has been a growing presence. And part of the reason I did that was because my parents were friends with the apprentices to Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. And I grew up with these people. And I saw the work, and I was sneaking into my father's studio as a child to look at the really scary prints by Jose Guadalupe Posada that you see in the Codex Espangliensis. I was terrified by those skeletons and what was going on. And so when I got to a certain point in my life and I was introduced to the Chicano community, arts community, I also realized that I was very curious what was going on in my generation in that community in the arts. And so I reached out, I started working. My first poet, Francisco Alarcón, was a networker. He was a person who just brought you in and introduced you around. And so I met people, he recommended folks. We're only so sorry that he's now gone.
That's amazing. I am not getting a lot of questions in the question and answer, although a lot of people really enjoyed your talk. So I'll also tell you that the Codex Espangliensis I have brought out to so many classes over the years, and the students always are entranced by it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they just,
well, we can talk about that book because it has gone around the globe. That trade edition, supported by Elaine Katzenberger at the City Likes Books all these years, has traveled as far as India, where I was in correspondence with a student writing their PhD dissertation on the book. It has the Maidosem's book drew me to the Holland Dance Festival in the early 90s, where it was used as, the auteur used it as a basis for a dance that was premiered, and we went and spoke. And so the books move, you know, and the limited editions, the artist books, they are widely viewed in libraries through special collections librarians such as yourself, which are such an important part of this scene. The fine book or the artist book wouldn't exist without the relationships between the librarians, the printers, publishers, and the collectors. And we struggle with that. And it's been a relationship that goes back many decades, but I think back again to the early 20th century with the French livre d'artiste and the fine artist books that drew collectors and drew librarians, and the Americans English and the Americans who picked up on that and were doing the same kind of work and building community. And now we are still reliant, people like me, on those relationships, but new things are coming along. And I think that if I was a young person coming up right now, letterpress tools are more expensive. Studio space is really difficult to procure. If I had the finances now as a young person that I had, you know, then I would be all over my laptop. That's why I'm so intrigued by publishing broadsides online. I mean, I'm publishing these broadsides, Lynn Ellis and Bo Beausoleil, that can be downloaded as PDFs and printed, or can be easily shared as JPEGs in social media I believe in the power of the word, and I believe in the power of the spoken word and the power of poetry, and poetry because it heightens each word. It asks us to pause and think about each word and each line. And prose is more cumulative, you know, it kind of grows and grabs you. And of course, oral traditions of poetry can do the same. But the word is available in so many forms, and it's not, but as someone who's been doing this kind of work for over 40 years, I'll just continue doing my thing. I'm going to keep on making the books that I have in my head as long as I can. And I'm, you know, desperate to get back to my metal type and my letterpress relief printmaking, and continue to make the work that I know to make. I mean, this was the big turning point in my career, was saying, okay, Copper Canyon Press is publishing fantastic poets in beautiful small editions to wide audiences. I can't do that as well. But I have in my head major works, monumental books, because I had the opportunity as a young person to work with book makers, printers, William Everson, Jack Stoffaker, who introduced me to the monumental book, you know, oversized, you know, self-important. But this is what I know how to make, and nobody else is going to make my books. And I think that was the kick in the ass that I gave myself finally in the early 90s, was like, I'm the only one who can do this. So I have to do it, and I have to keep doing it. I'm not going to curl up in a ball on my bed, shuffle around in my robe and slippers. It just doesn't, the books don't get out of my head that way. They don't become realized. And that's what's important to me.
Yeah. Oh, bless you. So we do have a question about new technologies that you are using. You spoke about the laser cutter that you were excited about getting. So are there other technologies you're thinking about?
Yeah,
Adding to
well, the laser cutter is daunting. I mean, I was the department manager for over 10 years for a brand new MFA program in digital art and new media. I just left 3 years ago. And there I was exposed to wonderful electronic and digital technologies. And I integrated them into my work with the dock-on-dock electronic aluminum case with sound and illumination. And the newest thing for me was the laser cutter, which we had that took up a whole room in our program. And now there's home hobbyist versions of laser cutter that you can put on a table and use to do the kind of work that we needed for a whole room for. So I'm excited to be making printing plates using that tool. And it's going to affect my aesthetic tremendously. I had a photopolymer plate maker, which was a different way of making a relief plate. It burnt up. So now I'm into the laser cutter. We're really excited to see what happens.
I have a very specific question. I'm going to just read it so I don't get it wrong. So in viewing the book with T.J. Demos, I wondered if you know the Plexigrams by John Cage, not wanting to say anything about Marcel. It is far more cryptic, but has a similarly nice fragmented way of extracting significant words or parts of words. Your book is really more legible and focused on the theme.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with John Cage's this particular piece. I'm familiar with the concepts and the music, and they definitely have influenced the thinking that I've been exposed to and that I've been working with in this new work.
We have someone who is very interested in the use of color in your work and asks how you are making the choices for color that are so vivid and powerful.
Well, first of all, I think I have heard that as you grow older, color becomes more important. So I started out very black and white, traditional craft, a little blue maybe, maybe a little red. And that's it. That's all you got. you know, and then if you got into the Jan Chickhold and those worlds, maybe you'd add yellow, you know. So we go along like that for a while, and then I'm deep in the design community because I managed a design program for 10 years, and so I'm exposed in the 90s and into the 2000s to a lot of design aesthetic, and I'm also working and working methodologies, and then I'm working with the Chicanx writers and artists, particularly Guillermo Gomez Pena, whose texts are energized, and he is on stage pulling energy from the ether. And the Chicano aesthetic also calls for bright color and activity. And I just took it as a complete challenge to bring color into my work, and vivid and layering color and more color, all the colors I could think of, all the colors I could mix. You know, that's a good challenge, you know, just mixing a bunch of color. And different sources of inks and what they do. And I just continued working with that since the early 2000s. So I don't want to make bland books. That's not okay with me.
Good. We have a couple of questions asking what advice you have for aspiring book artists, particularly people who want to contribute to social justice. And what the issues facing aspiring book artists are today.
Well, I think it's financial. I mean, everybody, you've got the ideas, you know what the issues are. You have the tools in terms of the digital tools. They are available. Broadcasting information is available online. But if you as a book artist are interested in a physical book, well, then we look to the zine community that's rapidly reproducing stuff. And then there are young people who are investing in tools, and there are centers for activity of book art in New York, San Francisco, important centers for book arts, where a lot of people study for periods of time, and then they go away and figure out, how can I do this? How can I continue? Oh, I can't continue doing this. I need presses and I don't have. I've always had assistants. I've had people come in and work with me. This has been hard lately for a number of reasons, but I really enjoy, and I've been very open to having young people come and work with me. So anybody who can figure out how we can do this, again, should just contact me. And I think there are, that we all have to be super ingenious as to how to make, if it's relief printmaking that you want to do and you want to incorporate words, there are some really interesting ways to do that without owning the tools of production, the press. You know, we used to say the power of the press, of the people, was in the press, or, you know, the people have the power. If they have the press, there's saying, you know, it's not true anymore. It's not the press, or the press in the broader sense, but even then, you know, not the printing press, but maybe the media. But we, you know, this is a big conversation.
So sort of related, but there are questions about what kind of work you would like to, in 20 years, you know, looking back, what sort of work do you want to see happen by then?
Ooh, what a great question. You know, when I'm saying taking my last breaths, what do I want to see around me besides my own work? Yeah. Well, I hope that people keep making books, because I sometimes feel like my generation is the last one. Maybe it's not, and I hope it's not, but, you know, that grew up with books. Look at you, Jane, with your bookcases behind you. Books are like part of what makes a home a home, what makes an office an office, they're a visual complement to our lives. What do they what do they project? Quiet, calm, focus, information, conversation, dialogues you'd never imagined. And all that's embodied in our digital tools too, but they're not the tools. That isn't what I grew up with. I didn't grow up learning online. I didn't grow up reading online. It's possible, but it's not natural to me. I don't have decades of practice at it. So I used to say that when I was lying on my deathbed, I could have divested myself of all the presses and the saw and the, everything, but I wanted my silver type, just put my bed next to the type cabinet, and it's like jewelry to me. It's beautiful. The silver pieces. I want just to open the drawer next to me. I want it next to me. And in fact, it's all gone. So, I think I'm going to try to get some again so that I can have some of it next to me when I pass. And then hopefully, hopefully there's someone out there who wants my tools and wants to carry on, which is, I was graced with the tools of Sherwood Grover, and I hope I can pass this on.
I have another really interesting question about the audience for your books and what that has been, but also here I'm going to read a little bit. Perhaps it's worth talking about the way in which the political popular impulse behind your content moves beyond the rarefied air of artist books in general. Given your impulses to contribute to and participate in your community, it's interesting that you chose this path, collector's editions. And as you move into digital presentations, what are your ideas about audience and intent?
Yeah.
Changing?
I try to touch on that in my talk about trade editions, the commercially printed editions of my work that I've tried really hard to make happen over the years, and they work, but they're still books. And in today's world, if you want to reach a population, the large population, the popular, I would make a game. So one of the thoughts for Doc on Doc was that it had all the elements to become an interactive art game, and I was, up until a few years ago, I was responsible for an undergraduate degree in game design. So it was like, oh yeah, this is the next step. We're going to make this into a game, but then we won't be making physical books. And I just keep bringing myself back to what I know how to do and what I can do with all of my being. I can make the physical book. I can train myself to do something else. I can bring it to the web. I can work on learning to make animations and sharing those of my books. I can make sure there are print editions. I can try to make animations of, we can do all, I can do all, I need those assistants. I need help. I can't, but what I can do is I can make the physical book, which does exist in a rarefied atmosphere, but at least it's safe, whereas all my work is gone. My personal copies, my personal copy of the Codex Hispaniolensis, the original hand-painted copy that is the basis for the trade edition, vaporized. The few other copies, I'll never have another copy of that. All my extra electronic cases that were still available for sale. I had 6 electronic cases for Doc on Doc, gone. I'll never have one of those. Why is it important to me to have the stuff? It seems that it is. When I was younger, I thought, should I be a musician? Should I be a visual artist making stuff? And I thought, I need stuff. I'm not okay with the temporality, the momentary nature, the ephemeral nature. I need the stuff. And I want the stuff that's going to live on beyond me,
As far as it can, yes.
Yeah.
Well, now you're just going to have to build up a new body of work that you can live with.
Yep.
And a new collection of metal type.
Yep. Yep. Good metal type.
Indeed. Well, I think we've answered most of the questions, and we've been going strong. I want to thank you so much for sharing all this with us. And, you know,
Yeah.
there's just been so many really, really positive comments in the Q&A with thanks for your inspiration.
Well, I just
And
want to thank everybody for showing up today for this. And it's been a real process developing the talk, which took me through, like, I can't do this talk. You know, I cannot do this. My throat will close to, well, I can just formula, you know, make sure that I say what I need to say within the time frame and it will be okay. I got there, and that's sort of the whole, that's the technique, you know, one foot in front of the other, you know, just keep moving forward.
indeed.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed that. So thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us. And I think we are now done.
All right.
So Emily, I am hoping knows how to end this.
I want to read the Q&A, so I'm afraid.